In the small town of Olden Hill, people live as if they've known each other their entire lives. Everyone has their own story, their own secrets. But sometimes, the darkest secrets lie right beneath our feet. For decades, Tom Mercer, the local cemetery caretaker, was seen as a symbol of trust and care. No one ever doubted his honesty. Until one day, the wrong grave was accidentally opened. This accidental discovery brings to light the chilling disappearance of a 6-year-old girl that happened 20 years ago. The investigation that begins today will touch city officials and the caretaker's own family, leading to truths that will take your breath away. This is Behind the Veil. I'm Mr. Hollow. Ready to look behind the curtain? It wasn't the wrong tomb because of a name. It was wrong because of what was inside. Tuesday morning. Light rain. Maintenance crew at Olden Hill Cemetery was clearing ground for a new burial near the East Row. It should have been routine. Dig, mark, cover, done. But when the backhoe hit the corner of the old concrete vault labeled Morrison, D, 1968, the foreman climbed down to double-check. Morrison was supposed to be 6 feet under, sealed and untouched since '03. Instead, the lid shifted too easily, and the air that came out made one of the workers throw up. They called it in as a breach. The sheriff's office didn't take long. Deputy Holt was first to arrive. Notebooks out, gloves on, tape up. He glanced at the vault, the lid still half pried, and signaled everyone back. Nobody touches anything until forensics arrives. An unmarked sedan pulled up 10 minutes later. Detective Julia Gray stepped out, black umbrella in one hand, steel thermos in the other. 43 years old, 10 of them in homicide. Eyes that made even good men uncomfortable when she stared too long. She didn't ask for a rundown. She walked straight to the vault. Inside, there wasn't a man named Morrison. Instead, beneath the plastic sheeting and formal wear remnants, lay the body of a small child. Female, wrapped in a deteriorated fleece blanket patterned with cartoon rabbits. Tiny shoes still on, mummified from decades underground. Julia didn't say a word. Behind her, a voice, steady, gravelly, cut through the drizzle. What the hell's going on? Everyone turned. It was Tom Mercer, the cemetery groundskeeper. Late 60s, keys hanging from his belt, damp flannel shirt half buttoned, wide stance like he was used to being the calm in any situation. You hit a casket? He asked the foreman, who nodded pale. No one was supposed to be in there, Julia said quietly. Tom approached, peering down. His face went gray. That's not Morrison. No, Julia said. It's a child. A long silence. Tom shook his head slowly. Impossible. We don't bury children in the old Eastern Row. Never have. Yet here she is. He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked at Julia again. Let me pull the burial ledger. Julia nodded, but didn't move. Her eyes were still locked on the blanket. 30 minutes later, inside the records room, a converted tool shed with dusty folders and a typewriter, Tom flipped through binders until he froze on one page. Morrison, Donald, cremated, interred in 2003, ashes only. Julia looked up. Ashes? But there's a body. Tom didn't respond. He stared at the paper like it might rewrite itself. She stepped outside to take a call. Yeah, she said into her phone. Send a full forensics team. And bring cold case files for any missing children from the area. Girl, approximately age 5 to 7. Long-term burial. Back by the vault, a tech approached cautiously. Detective, there's something else. Found this near the blanket. Julia took the evidence bag. Inside was a child's necklace. Plastic beads, cheap clasp. But the charm was unmistakable. A silver heart etched with the name Ella. Julia's voice was flat. Contact Missing Persons Archive. We're reopening the Harper file. The name cut through the morning fog like a warning bell. Ella Harper. Missing since 2001. Last seen walking home from school. Tom had just come back from medical leave that month. He'd been the last employee to see her alive. If you believe real investigations deserve real justice, like this video, share it, and don't forget to subscribe. This is just the beginning. The exhumation was done by noon, but nobody left. Rain had turned the cemetery soil to dark sludge, but the team from forensics kept working. Julia stood under a tree just off the crime scene tape, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the little evidence tent now covering the opened vault. A child's body hidden in the wrong grave for over 2 decades. Not an accident. Inside the sheriff's office back downtown, she spread the Harper case file across her desk. It was thin, too thin, missing posters, 2 witness statements, and 1 sketch of Ella's backpack, pink with dinosaurs, last seen near the creek behind Sanderson Elementary. No suspects, no body, no leads since November 2001. Until now. She glanced at the intake notes. Reported missing by mother, Angela Harper. Father deceased. Lived on Rosewood Lane. Walked to school daily. Last seen by neighbor Mrs. Lang around 7:50 a.m. That's all there was. Julia reached for her phone. This is Gray. I need someone to pull school staff rosters from Sanderson Elementary in 2001. Everyone. Teachers, janitors, volunteers, anyone registered that fall. She paused, then added, and cemetery staff, Olden Hill. The voice on the other end hesitated. That's just one guy, right? Been there since the late 80s? Tom Mercer. Pull his employment records, medical leave history, and any complaints. I want everything. She hung up and stared out the window. It had stopped raining, but the air still felt damp. Heavy. Tom sat alone in the break room, a cup of coffee untouched in front of him. Across the table, Deputy Holt tried not to look as nervous as he felt. Tom, he said gently, you remember the Harper case, right? Tom nodded slowly. Course I do. Little girl, blonde hair, missing on her walk home. Did you ever meet her? Tom shook his head. Not personally. I mean, I saw her around. Small town. Everyone saw her. But no, I didn't know the family. You were on medical leave back then, weren't you? Tom's eyes narrowed. Why? Just trying to understand the timeline. You came back early that December. Ground was already frosting. Not much digging happening, right? Tom didn't answer. Who else had access to the grounds back then? No one, he said. Just me. Holt nodded, made a note. We'll need to take a look at your storage area. You know, standard protocol. Tom didn't object. He just sat back and rubbed his hands together like the cold had gotten in. You think I put that child in there? Holt didn't answer. Tom leaned forward. That's my cemetery. I take care of it. I don't lose track of graves. I don't bury people without record. But someone did. Tom's eyes flicked toward the window. Then find out who. That evening, Julia returned to the site. A mobile floodlight lit the area now, casting long shadows across damp headstones. She approached the vault again, now closed, and marked with a red tag. One of the crime techs met her at the edge. DNA swabs en route to the lab. Could take days. Anything else? He nodded. Found some disturbed soil about 4 plots down. Doesn't match the grave map. Julia followed him to a small patch of ground. Grass missing, dirt uneven. No headstone, no records. He handed her a photo. An aerial drone image showing a slight depression in the earth. You think it's another? We won't know until we dig. She didn't hesitate. Mark it. We start tomorrow. As she turned to leave, she glanced back toward the trees. Tom was there, watching, motionless, alone. At 6:45 the next morning, the backhoe operator waited silently beside the flagged patch of dirt. Julia stood nearby, coffee in one hand, gloves already on the other. The early fog hadn't lifted, and dew clung to everything like a second skin. "Go ahead," she said. The bucket hit earth, cutting clean through the soft layer. The machine peeled back the top foot of soil, roots, pebbles, damp loam. Then the operator paused. Something dense had caught the blade. He stepped down and started clearing manually with a spade. Julia knelt beside him. It didn't take long. About 18 inches down, they uncovered a plain wooden box. Not regulation size, not even lined. Nails barely held the lid together. She brushed the dirt aside and motioned for the forensics team. The box was lifted out and set on a tarp. Gloves, scalpel, photographs. They worked methodically. Inside, bones, smaller than expected, and something else. Folded fabric, discolored but intact. A red and white striped t-shirt. Julia's stomach tightened. She remembered that shirt. It had been part of a missing persons bulletin. Not Ella's. Another case. Another child. "Tag and seal it," she said flatly. One of the techs looked at her. "Should we notify the coroner?" She nodded. "And I need full ground penetrating radar on this quadrant. Today." Back at her office, files were already waiting. Printouts from Sanderson Elementary, town staff logs, and burial reports from the early 2000s. Ella Harper wasn't the only child who disappeared in those years. Tyrese Latimer, age 9, last seen 2005. Walked home from choir practice, never made it. Lisa Carrington, age 6, vanished 1999. Backyard gate left open, never found. Each case within a 10-mile radius. All cold, all buried under time and paperwork. Julia circled the names. She picked up the phone. "Start reprocessing everything. I want all unmarked graves checked. If there's a death certificate but no matching plot, flag it. And give me every call-out Tom Mercer handled solo." That afternoon, Julia returned to the cemetery. Tom was working. He always was. Tom was working. He always was. Shirt sleeves rolled, shoveling gravel along a service path like nothing had changed. She approached. "Tom." He turned. "Detective, we found another body." His eyes didn't change. "Child," she added. Still no reaction. "You've been here over 30 years. "That's right. You ever bury anyone without paperwork?" Tom looked at the shovel in his hands, then back at her. "No. You sure?" "I dig where I'm told." "What if someone told you wrong?" Tom didn't blink. "Then I ask who signed the order." "You keep those?" "In my office. Everything's filed." "Can I see it?" He nodded once. They walked in silence toward the office. Inside, the air was cool, still. He moved to the filing cabinet, unlocked it, and pulled a drawer. Thousands of slips, stacked by year. She scanned them. In the folder marked 2001, a yellowing document stuck out. Not an order, a note, no signature. Just 2 lines. "Use Morrison Vault. No questions. We'll compensate." It was in block letters. Xeroxed. Tom's voice was quiet behind her. "I don't remember this." "But you followed it." He didn't answer. Julia turned toward him. "What aren't you telling me?" Tom finally looked up, and for the first time something flickered behind his eyes. Shame. Or fear. Maybe both. "You should check the northern fence line," he said, "near the tool shed." "Why?" "There used to be a tree there. Big one. Oak. Got hit by lightning in '03. We cut it down." "And?" His voice dropped. "Something was buried under it." The tool shed sat near the edge of Olden Hill Cemetery, where the gravel turned to wild brush and the terrain sloped toward the woods. It was the kind of forgotten corner people passed without noticing. Julia had walked by it half a dozen times in the last 2 days and never once thought to look closer. Now she stood just beyond the shed, boots sinking slightly into the overgrown earth. The stump was still there, thick, blackened in the center, like it had never fully healed from the strike. She ran her hand along the splintered rings. "Here," she said, pointing to the soil just in front of the stump. 2 officers began digging. 15 minutes passed. The shovel hit something solid. One officer crouched, brushed away dirt. A metallic edge glinted through the soil. A box. Old. Rusted at the hinges. Julia signaled for gloves and leaned in. The box was no larger than a suitcase. They set it on the tarp and flipped the latches. It creaked open with a dry metallic gasp. Inside, under layers of wax, paper, and plastic, lay what looked like an assortment of personal effects. A child's mitten, a cracked pair of glasses, a bundle of letters tied with a red ribbon, and photos. Stacks of Polaroids, aged and curling. One by one, Julia lifted them out. Children, not posed, not smiling, some asleep, some not. One photo showed Ella Harper in the striped yellow dress from her school picture, seated on a folding chair in a dark room, wide-eyed, holding a stuffed bear. Another showed Tyrese Latimer wearing the choir robe his parents described the day he vanished. A third showed a child Julia didn't recognize, mouth taped, face wet with tears. She flipped the last photo over. A date, May 18th, 2001, 3 months before Ella disappeared. She stared at the date for a long moment, then stood and turned to the officer behind her. "Bag everything. Full evidence priority, and I want this catalog tonight." Back at the station, Julia pinned the photos to the board one by one. She didn't want to. She hated doing it. But she needed the pattern, needed the faces. 3 children, 3 cold cases, and a 4th, unidentified. The child in the last photo had dark skin, maybe 4 or 5 years old. No known reports matched his face, at least not locally. She added a under the photo and stepped back. Across the room, her phone buzzed. Forensics. "Gray." "We got a match," the voice said. "DNA from the second grave. It's Tyrese Latimer." Julia closed her eyes for half a second. "Anything else?" There was hesitation on the line. "We also ran a background on Mercer like you asked. Nothing criminal, no complaints. But there's something strange." "Go on." "In 1994, there was an incident involving his brother, Mark Mercer, arrested out of state on charges of unlawful imprisonment of a minor. Case dismissed, lack of evidence. But, get this." "What?" The arresting officer noted he had a key ring labeled Olden Hill. Julia's hand froze midair. "Tom has a brother?" she asked. "Apparently. Older. Never lived in Alden. But there's no record they ever stopped communicating." Julia hung up and turned back toward the board. The pieces weren't fitting around Tom. They were fitting through him. It was nearing 11 p.m. when Julia parked her car in front of the Mercer's residence, a narrow, pale blue ranch home tucked behind the cemetery grounds, separated by nothing but a chain-link fence and a gravel path. The porch light was off. No car in the drive. She knocked anyway. No answer. She walked around the side of the house with her flashlight sweeping across dry leaves and gardening tools. A plastic chair, a hose, a cracked dog bowl. The back door creaked open without resistance. "Tom?" she called, voice low but clear. "It's Detective Gray." Silence. Inside, the house was sparse, meticulously clean. Too clean. Countertops wiped dry. Carpet vacuum lines still visible. Framed photo of Tom in military uniform next to a folded flag sat untouched on a bookshelf. She stepped down into a small hallway and opened the nearest door. A bedroom. Neat. Nothing out of place. Next door, a storage room. Shelves lined with labeled containers, tools, holiday decorations, spare bulbs. She scanned each label, then froze. One was marked M, 1994. She pulled it down. Inside, a pair of men's gloves, a faded road map of Delaware, a gas receipt, and a black and white photo of two young men, Tom, unmistakably, and another man with a heavier build and similar jawline. Both smiling, arms draped over each other's shoulders. Written on the back, Tom and Mark, still brothers. Julia took a breath, then reached deeper into the box. A notebook. She flipped it open. Sparse notes, scrawled in jagged handwriting. Lists of names. Dates. A few were crossed out. She turned the page. August 4th, 2001. Ella, 4 p.m. Bus shed. Quiet girl. She slammed the book shut. 10 minutes later, the house was crawling with uniforms and evidence techs. Julia stood outside, coat collar turned up, staring into the night. Deputy Holt approached. "We're still looking for Tom. He's not here. You think he ran?" Julia shook her head. "No. I think he's hiding." She handed Holt the notebook. "That's not his handwriting. Compare it to Tom's employment forms. It doesn't match. This isn't his. But the photos, the items, he kept them, yes. But I don't think he took those kids." Holt flipped through the pages. "So who did?" "His brother, Mark." She paused, watching fog roll low through the cemetery's east fence. "And if I'm right, Tom's been protecting him." By sunrise, they had a partial address for Mark Mercer, a trailer registered under a different name located about 40 miles north in a wooded area near Halston Creek. Julia didn't wait. By 7:30 a.m., she and two state troopers pulled into the dirt lot. A sagging trailer, aluminum siding, no sign of movement, smoke-blackened fire pit nearby, a rusted generator. They approached slowly, weapons drawn. One trooper knocked. "State police, open the door." Nothing. The other circled back. "Detective," he called, "there's a shed out here." Julia moved fast. The shed was padlocked, thick, industrial style. She looked around, found a rusted pry bar beside a pile of lumber, and wedged it into the lock. A loud snap echoed in the still air. She opened the door. Inside, it was dark and cold. And then she saw it. A small cot, ropes on the floor, a metal bowl in the corner, and a drawing, childlike, stuck to the wall with tape. A stick figure. Next to it, scrawled in red crayon, "He says, I don't exist." Julia stepped back slowly. They weren't just looking at old graves anymore. This was still happening. The ride back to Olden Hill was quiet. Julia sat in the rear of the cruiser, her mind grinding like a rusted gear. They had issued an APB for Mark Mercer. The shed had been abandoned recently. The cot was warm, the ropes soft with use. Whoever had been held there, likely a child, was no longer inside. No blood, no remains, but also no trace of where they went. Tom Mercer hadn't returned to his home, nor answered calls. Julia stared out the window at the passing trees, their bare branches swaying like skeletal fingers. Back at the cemetery, patrol cars were stationed near the north gate. The storm clouds had thickened, and cold wind sliced across the rows of stone. Tom's office was locked. She had a key. Inside, the lights were off. His desk was untouched, still open to a page in the burial ledger like he'd meant to return any minute. A thermos of coffee sat untouched. Cold now. Julia looked around. Her eyes stopped at the bookshelf. A thin gap between the shelves caught her attention. She knelt and felt along the floor. The boards were uneven, hollow beneath. She pressed down. A click. The panel shifted inward. Behind the shelf was a narrow staircase. descending into darkness. "Call backup," she told Holt, "and bring lights." She descended slowly, flashlight beam cutting a narrow cone through the dark. The air grew musty, metallic, smelled of damp soil and something older, mildew, rot, dust. At the base of the stairs, a concrete corridor, low ceiling, pipes, walls lined with old grave markers, misprints, cracked slabs, names worn to stone dust. She moved forward, breath shallow. At the end of the hall was a steel door. It wasn't locked. She opened it. What lay beyond wasn't a room. It was a vault. Cold, silent. The floor was lined with plastic sheeting. In the center, 3 child-sized mattresses, folded blankets, no blood, no restraints, and drawings. Pinned to the walls, carefully, with tacks, not tape, crayon and pencil, stick figures holding hands, a tree, a sun, a cemetery gate, and in the corner, one drawing with a label scrawled in red. Me and Mr. Tom. Julia stood still. It hit her all at once. Tom didn't protect Mark. He protected them. She heard a creak behind her, turned. Tom stood at the top of the stairs. No gun, no anger, just the weight of a man who had spent too many years trying to clean up someone else's evil. "I never touched them," he said quietly. "Not one." Julia didn't speak. "I didn't know at first. Not really. Mark stayed with me a few months after the accident. Said he needed time. I thought he was just lost. Damaged. You found out." Tom nodded once. "First one, I didn't even know her name. She was already gone. I buried her where no one would ask. Mark said it was a mistake, a one-time thing. But it wasn't. No." He looked away. "When I found Ella, she was alive, scared, thin as a rail. She couldn't speak for days. I tried to go to the police, but I knew what would happen. Mark would vanish. The girl would go into some system, forgotten. So you kept her. I fed her, gave her a room. She called me Mr. Tom. And the others? I took them in. Everyone I found. I stopped him from taking more, but I never turned him in." Julia's voice was low. "Where are they now?" "Gone. Years ago. I made sure they got out. New names, new homes. I have nothing left, just the ledger and the bones." He looked down the hall toward the vault. "Now you know." She stepped toward him. "I have to arrest you." "I know." Tom raised his hand slowly. "They deserved better," he said, and Julia couldn't help but agree. The news broke by sundown. Local groundskeeper arrested after underground room found at cemetery. Multiple cold cases reopened. The headlines ran wild with speculation, but the truth remained murkier than any broadcast could handle. Julia sat alone in the station's evidence room, the overhead light flickering slightly above her. The drawings from the vault lay in plastic sleeves on the table. She'd reviewed every photo, every note, every grave. And still, one question clawed at her. Where was Mark Mercer? She flipped open the old notebook again, the one recovered from Tom's storage, and stared at a single phrase repeated in the margins of a later page. "He watches from the trees." Not a name, not a location, just that. Again and again. A knock broke the silence. Deputy Holt entered holding a folder. "We got the full statement from Tom," he said. Julia nodded. "Sit." He opened the file. "Says Mark showed up every few years. Never warned. Never stayed long. Tom always knew what it meant when he came back. Another child." "Yeah." She leaned forward. "Did he say when the last visit was?" Holt flipped pages. 3 years ago. "Any idea where he went?" "None. But he mentioned something strange. Said Mark always came around November, always after Halloween. Never missed a year, except last year." Julia narrowed her eyes. And this year? Nothing. She stood suddenly. Pull records for unusual activity. Any missing kids, trespassing reports, anything, from late October till now, and expand the radius to 3 counties. Holt nodded and moved fast. 2 hours later, Julia had her answer. A report from 15 days prior, filed in the next county over. November 3rd, Rural Road, 11 p.m. Woman reports seeing a man dragging something near the tree line behind Elkhorn Rest Stop. Patrol responded. Found disturbed ground but no sign of anyone. Filed as wildlife-related. No follow-up. She grabbed her coat. It was past midnight when Julia reached Elkhorn. Fog hugged the ground, thick and slow. The rest stop was empty, just vending machines and a cracked picnic table. But behind it, the forest began. She walked the trail with a flashlight, boots crushing wet leaves. Half a mile in, she found it. The disturbed ground, and a marker. Rough, wooden, burned into it crudely. RS. She radioed for backup, forensics, and a search crew. As she waited, she turned slowly, scanning the tree line. It was too quiet. The flashlight flicked once, then held. Her hand went to the grip of her sidearm. She couldn't see anything, but she knew someone was out there, watching. They moved in at dawn. Crime scene tape fluttered from tree to tree as the forensics team worked in near silence, digging carefully around the marker labeled RS. By 7:15, the first layer had been cleared. Beneath the loose soil lay a shallow grave, not properly sealed, barely disguised. The body of a young boy, shoes still on, blue hoodie, blood dried around the collar. Julia stood nearby, jaw tight, arms crossed as the coroner worked. Estimated time of death? She asked. The medical examiner looked up, grim. Maybe 2 weeks. Lividity and decomposition match. No ID, no documents. A tech came running from the perimeter. Detective, we found something. She followed him down a narrow deer trail leading deeper into the woods. About 100 yards from the first site, another small clearing. There, half hidden by fallen branches and leaves, was a blue camping tent. She drew her weapon. Wait here. The zipper opened with a slow rasp. Empty, but not clean. Inside were food wrappers, a half-burnt journal, a flashlight, and a duffel bag. Julia opened it. Inside were children's clothes, girls' sizes, all folded, all worn, and beneath them, rope, duct tape, a surgical mask. She stepped back and radioed Holt. Get this area sealed. I want dogs. I want aerial thermal drones. He's close. Back at the station, Tom Mercer was being processed. Fingerprints, DNA, standard booking. Julia watched through the glass. He sat still, hands on the table, face unreadable. She stepped inside. You lied, she said. Tom didn't flinch. About what? About the last visit. Mark didn't come 3 years ago. He's been active. He's still moving. Tom exhaled slowly. I didn't know. I think you did. He looked up, eyes bloodshot. I knew he wouldn't stop. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I didn't dig too deep, I could contain him. You buried his victims. I saved the ones I could. And the ones you couldn't? He didn't answer. She leaned forward. You want to help now? Really help? Tom stared at the tabletop, then nodded once. There's one more site, he said, but I've never been there. Where? Tom looked up, and for the first time his voice trembled. Mark had a place, before I hired on at Olden, an old storm cellar behind our grandfather's farm in Willow Creek. Julia's breath caught. There's no record of that. There wouldn't be. Farm's gone, burned down in '88, but the cellar was made of stone, could still be standing. She turned on her heel and barked into the hallway. Get me a map. We're going to Willow Creek. By afternoon, they'd reached the site. Nothing remained of the house, just blackened foundation stones and overgrowth. But the storm cellar was still there. A slanted door of rotted wood, chained shut with rusted iron links. They cut them with bolt cutters. Julia descended first, gun raised. The air was foul, damp, tight. The walls were stone, old and slick with moss, but the floor was dry. On the far wall, a cot, a chair, a thick canvas sack. She approached, heart thudding, and opened the bag. Inside, photographs, more Polaroids, more children. Some they recognized, some they didn't, and one marked with a red X. She turned it over. The date. Tomorrow. Julia turned to Holt. He's not running. She held up the photo. He's planning another one. November 17th. Noon. Julia sat in the command van parked half a mile from the cellar site. The photo recovered from the canvas bag showed a girl, maybe 9, with bright red braces and a striped hoodie, posed against a graffiti wall. Local. She was ID'd within the hour. Maisie Thornton, last seen walking home from school 2 days ago. And now they had a clock. Based on Mark's pattern, the abduction had just occurred. He didn't kill quickly. He watched. He waited. He made it a ritual. But today, someone was watching him. The state police canvassed the area while Julia reviewed maps, water tables, and property tax records. One plot, half a mile east, showed no structure but hadn't paid taxes in over 20 years. The name on it? Mercer, M. She didn't wait for clearance. Julia took Holt and 2 officers on foot. The forest here was thicker, quieter. As they neared the coordinates, she raised her hand. There, a shack, leaning, collapsing in places, but still intact. She signaled for silence, drew her weapon. They fanned out. Julia moved around back, her boots barely touching the earth. A low creak. Inside. She pressed against the wall, heart hammering. From within, a voice, male, calm, talking low. They don't understand you. But I do. I always have. Julia took a breath, then kicked the door in. Police, hands where I can see them. Mark Mercer stood in the center of the room. Maisie was in the corner, bound but alert, eyes wide and locked on Julia. Mark didn't move. He was older now, early 70s, beard to his chest, shirt stained with dirt and something else. But his eyes, they were cold and calculating. You shouldn't have come, he said softly. Holt burst in behind her. On your knees. Now. Mark didn't resist. He knelt. Julia moved fast to Maisie, cut her restraints, pulled her into her arms. You're safe now, she whispered. But over her shoulder, Mark was smiling. He said one thing, just loud enough. You stopped me, but you didn't stop it. 2 days later, Julia stood alone at Olden Hill. Tom Mercer had agreed to a full confession in exchange for leniency. Mark had been transferred under maximum security. Maisie was with her parents again, shaken but alive. But Julia wasn't at peace. She walked to the eastern fence line, where that first accidental unsealing began it all. The Morrison vault. It was sealed now, properly, but she still remembered what was inside. The child who should have never been there. The girl who made the ground tell the truth. She knelt and placed a single white lily near the grave. No ceremony. No words. Just acknowledgement. Behind her, the wind moved through the trees. Quiet. Watchful. But for the first time in decades, the earth wasn't hiding anyone.